Good morning, my friend. I hope you're doing well. It's 4 o'clock in the morning on Friday, 24 September 2021. We're getting ready for a beautiful day here. It's been a crazy week, and yesterday I was all set to record and bring you a new episode, and our internet was out all day. I got home from the hospital early and had all this time ready to go to bring you a new episode, and the internet was down. So, fortunately, woke up this morning. We've got internet again, but time is the issue here. I'm going to release an episode. I've been thinking a lot about bringing back this conversation that we had about the words that we use and when or if it's ever appropriate to use swear words. We talk about cussing in an episode way back in 2020, and it turned out to be one of the more downloaded episodes I've ever done. And it's been private for the patrons for a while, but I want to bring that back to you this morning and just let you have that again so we can get the conversation started again. It's kind of an interesting thing on social media where Christians are using swear words and they've decided that it's okay. And I just want to put this in front of you. There's some neuroscience around what happens to our brains when we use salty language. And there's certainly some scripture around what our words are supposed to be about and what they're supposed to sound like and how they're supposed to impact other people. And so I just put this back in front of you, and we'll be recording some new episodes this afternoon and all through the weekend. We'll have Tuesdays with Tata next week coming back. And so we're back. We got internet again. I'm not sure what happened yesterday, but it was out for a good 18 hours. And so pray for me. The book is almost done. It's coming very close to being completed, and I appreciate your prayers and your support. Go out to the prayer wall, wle1md.com/prayer, and there's a lot of tough situations out there, and people really need your prayers, and we need to be praying for you, and you need to be praying for us. So check it out, wle1md.com/prayer. And I've been telling you about the voicemail. We have 3 voicemails from listeners this morning. I'm going to play you one now.
Hi, Dr. Warren. This is Kathleen from Ohio. I have been just sick about a problem with my son and daughter-in-law and their little new baby who's a month old. My daughter-in-law, has been having some terrible postpartum depression, point of almost being suicidal, quarantining so I can go over and help with the baby, repeatedly turning it over to God. And until this morning when I listened to your podcast, I just felt it was impossible, but now I don't. And I just thank you for that podcast.
Well, thank you, Kathleen. We are praying for you, and we hope that the Lord ministers to you while you're quarantined and takes care of your family. We appreciate you greatly. And friend, that's what it's all about. This podcast is about helping people get their heads on straight in the midst of the hard things that we're all going to face in life. And it's also about creating a community, a water cooler where people can gather and talk about real situations in their lives. And so that's why we put this podcast out. That's why Lisa and I and now Tata are working so hard to present this information to you and just a community, right? Here's another
Morning, Dr. Warren. My name is Keith Judkins. I live in Owasso, Oklahoma, and have enjoyed tremendously your weekly writings. Your podcasts have been touched similar to some of the things that you've talked about concerning September 11th, 2001. First of all, I lived in the D.C. area when 2 planes hit the 2 Twin Towers and also the Pentagon and the plane that crashed in Pennsylvania. Many friends worked in the Pentagon. They had to walk home from Washington, D.C. area that day because there was no transportation. It was total chaos.
It was total chaos, Keith. You're right. And, those traumas that we go through, they don't ever go away. And even, here 20 years later after 9/11, all of us are still remembering and feeling all the things that we went through those days, especially those of us who were either in the military or who were first responders or who lost someone associated with the events of that day. So thank you, Keith, for sharing that with us. And we're praying for you and your lovely wife out there in Oklahoma. And thanks for being part of this community. And finally, we have a voicemail from Mary Goosey. Mary and Don are great supporters of the podcast, and Mary had this to say.
Hi, Dr. Warren and Lisa. This is Mary. My husband, Don, and I listen to your podcast on a regular basis. We've learned so much about our mind and how we can help to encourage ourselves by thinking about what we're thinking about. Don't dwell on the negative. Think not just positively, but on what is true, what the Word says is true, what is good. And we have ordered some of the books that you have suggested and are reading them or have read them, and we share them with others. And we always tell everybody that we come into contact with when discussing our lives and our health.
Thank you, Mary. We appreciate the support, and we're glad the work is helping you. Friend, if you have a question or a comment or an idea for an episode or something you want to say to me or Lisa or Tata, then hit us up at wleewarrenmd.com/voicemail, wleewarrenmd.com/voicemail. Now, without further ado, I'm going to bring you back this episode, The Neuroscience and Spirituality of Cussing, and we'll be back with a new full-length episode tomorrow, and Tata and I are coming at you with Tuesdays with Tata back this week. We love you, friend. We're with you. Enjoy this episode, and let me hear from you and see what you think about this one, about when is it ever appropriate to let them fly with some salty language. So here you go, Neuroscience and Spirituality of Cussing. We love you. We'll see you soon. God bless. Good morning, my friend. It is 6 o'clock in the morning on a Sunday. It's going to be a beautiful, partly cloudy sunrise here in Nebraska. Hope you're doing well. We had kind of a crazy week. There's a lot of contact from readers and listeners. The last two podcast episodes really touched nerves around the world. It seems like the End of Infinity and the Hope is a Verb episodes both got a tremendous amount of contact. And then YouVersion ran my Bible study again, and a bunch of new people signed up. So if you're new to the podcast because you found us through YouVersion, we're glad to have you. If you have not signed up for the newsletter, wleewarrenmd.com/newsletter, I would highly encourage you to get more connected. Lisa and I both really appreciate the connection with listeners and readers to the newsletter, and it's created this sort of culture, this sort of community around the world that's actually connecting people and helping people. So wleewarrenmd.com/newsletter, if you're not connected already, check it out. So a lot of stuff going on. We actually got to Zoom with our new friend Hank in Europe, whose wife has glioblastoma, and we had a wonderful conversation with him and continue to ask you to pray for Hank and his wife, and just lovely people. And it's been a great new little friendship that's budding there. And all of that came about because of the book and the podcast and the newsletter and all of that. And we're really grateful for that form of connection around the world. This past week, we had over 1,000 surgical instruments that arrived at the hospital that got processed, and had a whole team of people, our folks that came with us from Casper and hospital folks together building instrument sets and getting ready to go. We actually thought we were going to operate this past week, but the patient had a medical issue come up, so we got that delayed, and we're starting this coming week. So our new neurosurgery practice from the ground up will actually launch in a few days here, and I would ask you to continue to pray for that, that people will be well served and lives will be saved, function restored, pain relieved, and that we will, as always, honor Christ with our lives and our practices here. And there's been a lot going on. You know, we've had a lot going on in the world. Everybody's kind of stressed out. So we're praying for you. You keep praying for us, and we will all get through this together, my friend. So in the midst of all the stuff that's been going on, I had a couple of things happen that got me thinking about language, and not languages like Spanish or English, but the language that we use, the words, the choice that we make to use certain types of words. And particularly, I read a paper about the neuroscience of what happens when people cuss, when they use foul language. And it's interesting, it's sort of fascinating what happens in your brain when you engage in foul language. And at the same time, I've lately been noticing that there's some movement in the Christian world on social media where a lot of Christian authors now, especially younger authors that I've been following, and some Christian influencers, artists and other people, are commonly using swear words in their posts now. Back when I first started writing, my first book, No Place to Hide, came out from Zondervan in 2014. And at that time, there was actually an official policy from Zondervan that they didn't publish swear words. If you had a cuss word, any sort of foul word in your book, it was going to get scrubbed by editors. And now, there's a new book by Zondervan out that I'm following the author on social media, and this particular author commonly uses swear words in their posts on Instagram and Twitter every day. And it's sort of this idea that we need to be relevant to the world and use the kind of language that they use, and Christ can redeem that. And there's plenty of grace for people who even people who cuss and whatever. I'm not saying anything about this particular writer. I'm saying that it's interesting to me that in the course of 6 years, that a big-time, well-known Christian publisher is now allowing that when they didn't before. So my question, whenever a standard changes like that, is always like, well, did God change? Did the Bible change? Did our faith change? Like, what changed that allowed that sort of editorial decision to get made? And so I was thinking about that and thinking about this neuroscience article, and we had some pretty stressful events this past week, and there were some a few things that happened where people had some conflict, and just got me thinking about language and how we treat each other and what we say to each other. And is there some direction from neuroscience that we could get that would be helpful there? Is there any direction in Scripture that we could get? So I thought it might actually be helpful to look at the neuroscience and neurochemistry and spirituality of cussing and just see if we can learn something from that. And maybe when we speak and when we write, we can think about these things in a different way. Luke 6:45 in the Bible, Jesus says, "A good person produces good things from the treasury of a good heart, and an evil person produces evil things from the treasury of an evil heart. What you say flows from what is in your heart." So today, let's take a look at our words. It's always good to think about our thinking, but it's also good to think about our speaking. So we're going to do that. We're going to look at the neuroscience, neurochemistry, and spirituality of cussing, and we're going to start today. Hey, I'm so glad to have you listening today. I'm Dr. Lee Warren. I live in Nebraska in the United States of America with my unbelievably beautiful and talented wife, Lisa Warren. I am a neurosurgeon and an author, and I'm here to help you harness neuroscience, the power of your brain, faith, the power of your spirit, and good old common sense to help you lead a healthier, better, happier life. Listen, you can't change your life until you change your mind, and I'm here to help you learn the art of self-brain surgery to get that done. You can get the show notes and more on my website at wleewarrenmd.com and add the /newsletter if you want to connect with the newsletter. Hey, if you think this is valuable, if you like the show, please share it with some friends around the world, because just imagine how far a little positive medicine could spread if you took the time to share it with your friends. I'm Dr. Lee Warren, and my podcast is all about changing our minds so we can change our lives. Let's get after it. All right, so there is a famous neurologist named Paul Broca. Broca lived in the late 1800s, mid-1800s, and one of the areas of the brain is actually named after him. The dominant speech area in the frontal lobe is called Broca's area. Broca did all this language research and was one of the guys that figured out about a condition called aphasia. So aphasia is a condition, there's several different types, but in general, it's a condition where you cannot communicate with spoken language well because the parts of your brain that produce reasonable and intelligible speech are damaged in some way, usually from a stroke, sometimes from a brain tumor or a head injury. But Broca noticed in 1861 when he reported a patient who retained what he calls sacre nom de Dieu. Sacre nom de Dieu, basically the sacred name of God. So this person had a stroke and couldn't speak, but could still say sacred words or foul words, so curse words. So this particular patient had retained the ability to cuss and to use deity-type words, despite the loss of the ability to communicate anything else that made any sense. So obviously Broca figured out that there was something special about certain words that are saved or stored or retrieved in different ways than normal words. There's an article by a guy named Charlie Wood in brainfacts.org, and I'll put the links in the show note. Really great kind of overview of the neurochemistry of foul language and what happens to our brains when we use certain words. And he's talked about how the idea of people with Tourette's syndrome, which of course is a neurodegenerative condition where people have these impulses that fire in their brain, and they engage in repetitive, unusual activities, sometimes violent ones, and sometimes very strong language that comes out that they can't control. And so he noticed, he references some research in this article, Charlie Wood again in brainfacts.org, talks about how the idea of catharsis, there's something that's released in Tourette syndrome. There's some sort of pressure that builds up in the neurochemistry, needs it to be released. And so these repetitive firings are how those people get rid of that stress, that internal stress that's building up. And he applies that to the idea that when you cuss, you get this sort of emotional catharsis, right? It feels good for some people to let out a bunch of expletives. It's sort of like punching a wall without having to punch it. From a neurochemistry standpoint, you get the same sort of changes in your brain when you release stress by cussing as you do by punching something. So dropping an F-bomb on somebody or cussing somebody out is almost chemically, this produces the same sort of things in your brain as a physical act does. And even more interestingly, when you hear that language, when somebody gives you a good cussing or says something harmful to you in terms of foul language, your basal ganglia, the part of your brain that's involved in Tourette syndrome, reacts like you've been physically injured. So the chemical act of swearing produces a same kind of chemical change in your brain as fouling, as actual physical acts like punching do. But receiving curse words produces the same type of wound in your brain as actually being struck does. Very interesting. So people who receive the bombast, lambast of your foul language react physically and emotionally as if they have been physically wounded. And you know that. If you've ever received a good cussing from somebody, you know how it feels. You walk away feeling like you have been physically attacked, right? And the reason for that, the underlying reason for that is down in the amygdala, the very emotional part of your brain, the ancient part of your brain, the stuff that's old that animals have too, that's not as refined and finessed as our frontal lobes, which is really what makes us human. The amygdala, down deep, can't separate a threat. It just perceives a threat. So it can't separate whether it's a verbal one, a physical one, a real one, or an imagined one, a worry, or an actual snake under your feet. The amygdala can only produce the response of fear, threat, pain, that sort of thing. The amygdala can't sort it out. So emotionally, the things that trigger inside you when you cuss or when you receive a cussing are the same as in physical activities, punching, fighting, being punched, being hit, which is really pretty amazing because it gets down to fear and threat detection. And so what I'm interested in, some people even break out in sweat and have other emotional reactions, physical reactions to the emotion that they're feeling that's being triggered by the amygdala and the older parts of the brain. And what I want to get at here is the idea that when you choose the kinds of words that you use in terms of dealing with another person, you really are choosing whether you're going to wield weapons against that person or not. You are actually making a decision. If you swear at somebody, cuss them out, call them certain words, say certain things to them, you're actually basically assaulting them with your words, because in their brain and in their heart, they are going to receive those words as a physical attack. So don't think of it lightly to use your words in that aggressive way as it's just you venting or getting something off your chest, because you're actually choosing to attack someone, and they're going to experience that attack in the exact same way as they would if you physically attacked them. And so I just want to plant the idea that, especially if you're a Christian out there, the idea that choosing to assault someone with your words is really, it's verbal abuse. It's a form of abusing someone. So this is really interesting to me too. The amygdala and the basal ganglia, these two parts of the brain that we're talking about, are part of what the evolutionists call the old part of the brain. I believe God created it all at the same time, but basically lower animals have these parts of the brain too. The frontal cortex, the higher stuff, your cerebral cortex, is what gives you a lot of the the skills that you have as a human being, the ability to dissect your thoughts before you allow them into your brain, the ability to control your tongue, to control your behavior. The reason you don't punch the wall every time is because your frontal cortex can get involved, and you can basically override those deeper parts of the brain. But cats and animals, when you scare a cat or threaten a cat, what does it do? It hunches up its back and it hisses, it bares its claws, it shows you its teeth. That's amygdala. That's the deep part of the brain where there's a threat and there's a response and you can't stop it. So when you cuss, basically, you're firing from those deep hissing parts of the brain. And your frontal lobe can override it. And usually, at least in my experience, in the times that I've done those things, I usually know before the words come out of my mouth that I shouldn't say them. But the amygdala can sort of win. If you are overdriven by the emotion, the amygdala, the deeper parts of the brain, can win, and the hiss comes out. Except in humans, it doesn't come out as a hiss. It usually comes out as an F word or a blankety blank on somebody. And so you've got this link between emotion and the deeper parts of the brain, amygdala and basal ganglia, and the interaction of the frontal cortex and your willpower and your ability to choose the words that you say. Those are all linked together. Okay? Now, as Christians, if you're a Christian, we should consider how our words are perceived in our culture today. In other words, if I'm going to use a particular word, what is the person that hears that going to think I mean? What is a particular word like the F word? What does it mean in our culture today when somebody hears me say that word? What am I trying to communicate to them when I use that word? How are they going to feel? How does it feel when I hear the word and somebody says it to me? And is there any way that particular word can build somebody else up, or does it ever benefit somebody to hear that word? Now, the bottom line is profanity is never helpful. It never builds somebody up. It doesn't ever make somebody better for you to cuss them, does it? It doesn't. It doesn't ever help the other person. It always hurts. It's always a negative impact. So the question for you is to look at what Jesus said in Matthew 5:22. In Matthew 5:22, Jesus made it pretty clear. He said, if you say to your brother, if you're angry with your brother, you're going to be judged. If you are insulting your brother, you'll be judged. If you call your brother a fool, you will be judged. So Jesus says, be careful with your words. Be careful with your words, because I want you to be kind to your brother and your sister. So the idea then is, if we're going to have this amazing brain that God gave us, it's got a frontal cortex, and we are in control of thinking about our thinking, and we have the ability to put a stop between our basal ganglia and our amygdala and those deeper parts of the brain and the hissing cat type thing. If we have the ability to put a filter in there and a pause and a stop, then do we have a responsibility? If you have an ability, do you have a responsibility? And Jesus says, don't cuss your brother. Don't call him a fool. Don't give him a swearing, or I'm going to think about you in a different way. So I just want to kind of get you thinking about your words today. There's a really good article in Christianity Today by a woman named Carolyn Arends from back in 2013. I'll put a link in the show notes, and she makes some really good points. I'm going to read a little bit about what she said here. She started with the idea that her little girl said, Mommy, why can't we say certain words? Why isn't elbow a cuss word? Why isn't thumb a cuss word? Why is that particular word bad and this particular word's not? And she says there is something kind of absurd about the designation of particular words as being profanities, and yet neither table nor elbow is in the cursing category. Here's a really important point she's about to make. The majority of swear words relate to either biological functions, God's name in some way, or association with sex or waste elimination. So you think about it for a second. Every cuss word you can think of has either God's name involved in it, Jesus' God's name involved in it in some way, or some type of biology, defecation, waste elimination, or sexual function. So all of the words that we kind of as a society agree to that are cuss words have to do with those things: God, waste, biology, sex, right? So what are we supposed to do when God says, don't use my name in vain? What are we supposed to do with that? Language is kind of a social construct, she writes. And we agree that everybody kind of understands that certain words are taboo. Certain words are foul. Certain words are dirty, if you will, that we're not supposed to use them in church, right? Everybody kind of knows that. Even if you are a person who swears, you still know that there are some places and times when you're not supposed to do those things. Why? Because those words are kind of agreed upon by society that they are foul language, right? Now, of course, words only hold the power that we give them, but curse words have a different kind of power because they hit the brain in a different way. And so if you understand the neurochemistry here, that you understand that certain words are going to be received by the person that hears them as actually injurious, as actually triggering the emotion as if you had punched them, then that should change the way you think about how you choose to address other people, because you are not only using words that society and the Bible would say are profane, but you also are choosing to use your words as a weapon that will in fact injure the other person, at least emotionally. It's what you're doing. If you choose to injure someone and you know that it's going to injure them before you do it, then that means you have contempt for them. It means that even if it's just in that moment, you have contempt and hate in your heart for that person instead of love. Contempt is a toxic thing. It's a mixture, this lady writes, of anger and disgust. You're expressing something from a position of superiority. You're choosing to denigrate, devalue, and dismiss them with your words. And it's not hard to understand why even a little bit of contempt really hurts people, whether it's in a marriage or in a friendship or in a work relationship or anywhere. Contempt is harmful. And so if profane or foul language has this privileged place in contemptuous behavior, then Christians ought to have a serious thought before they engage in that type of language, because God never authorizes us to view anybody else with contempt. In fact, God never authorizes us to do anything but love other people. God never says the phrase, God damn, for example, because God doesn't damn people. He gives them free will, and he wants them to be saved. The Bible says over and over and over, God does a lot to try to save people. And it's their free will. If they end up not being with him for eternity, it's because they chose not to be. So when you say that you hope God damns someone, you are saying something that God doesn't do. You're putting yourself in a position above God almost to say that you think that you should ask him to damn someone to eternal hell, and he's not even willing to do that. So you need to be careful with your words, is where I'm going. What does the Bible say? Colossians 4:6. Let your conversation be always full of grace, seasoned with salt, so that you may know how to answer everyone. Ephesians 4:29 and 30. Don't use foul or abusive language. Let everything you say be good and helpful, so that your words will be an encouragement to those who hear them. And do not bring sorrow to God's Holy Spirit by the way you live. The NIV there says, let no unwholesome talk escape your mouth. There's not a lot of wiggle room in the word no, is there? Let no unwholesome talk. Don't use foul or abusive language, but let everything you say be good and helpful, so that your words will be an encouragement to those who hear them. Listen, we're living in some dark times right now, friend. Things are hard. There's scary stuff. There's global pandemic, and there's riots, and there's cancel culture, and there's all these things that are happening, and it's scary for people. People are afraid. And the last thing they need, the last thing another struggling human being right now needs, is for you to abuse them with your language. The last thing they need is to be discouraged by you instead of encouraged by you. And so I would implore you to think about the words that you speak. James chapter 3. Let's go through this. This is kind of a bellwether test of what you ought to be doing with your tongue. James chapter 3, New Living Translation. For if we could control our tongues, we would be perfect, and could also control ourselves in every other way. We can make a large horse go wherever we want by means of a small bit in its mouth. And a small rudder makes a huge ship turn wherever the pilot chooses to go, even though the winds are strong. In the same way, the tongue is a small thing that makes grand speeches, but a tiny spark can set a great forest on fire. And among all the parts of the body, the tongue is a flame of fire. It is a whole world of wickedness, corrupting your entire body. It can set your whole life on fire, for it is set on fire by hell itself. People can tame all kinds of animals, birds, reptiles, and fish, but no one can tame the tongue. It is restless and evil, full of deadly poison. Sometimes it praises our Lord and Father, and sometimes it curses those who have been made in the image of God. And so blessing and cursing come pouring out of the same mouth. Surely, my brothers and sisters, this is not right. Does a spring of water bubble out with both fresh water and bitter water? Does a fig tree produce olives or a grapevine produce figs? No. And you can't draw fresh water from a salty spring. If you are wise and understand God's ways, prove it by living an honorable life, doing good works with the humility that comes from wisdom. And let's not forget Romans 12. Therefore, I urge you, brothers and sisters, in view of God's mercy, to offer your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God. This is your true and proper worship. Do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Then you will be able to test and approve what God's will is, his good, pleasing, and perfect will. Love must be sincere. Hate what is evil. Cling to what is good. Be devoted to one another in love. Honor one another above yourselves. Never be lacking in zeal, but keep your spiritual fervor, serving the Lord. Be joyful in hope, patient in affliction, faithful in prayer. Share with the Lord's people who are in need. Practice hospitality. Bless those who persecute you. Bless and do not curse them. If it is possible, as far as it depends on you, live at peace with everyone. So my question for you, friend, is this. Is your language or the words that you choose part of what is possible as far as it depends on you? Can you, when you are enraged, when someone has hurt you, when you are offended, when you are scared, can you bridle your tongue? Can you take that step of going as far as it depends on you to live at peace, to not be the one who damns another person, who hurts another person with their words, who uses language that will injure that person in their spirit? As far as it depends on you, can you bridle your tongue? Here's the deal. What separates us from the apes is our frontal lobe, our frontal cortex that God so wonderfully designed. The fact that God gave you and gave me the ability to control our thinking and critically examine our responses to the various stimuli that life throws at us before we act, before we speak, before we react, that's what separates us from the apes. We can think about our thinking and we can control it. And we know from neuroscience that cussing comes from the same place that makes a cat hiss when she's mad. And Jesus said that you are in great danger if you curse others, because not even God does that. So I leave you with Proverbs 17 again. In the Passion Translation, Proverbs 17, 27 and 28. Can you bridle your tongue when your heart is under pressure? That's how you show that you're wise. An understanding heart keeps you cool, calm, and collected no matter what you're facing. If you're not spiritual, if you're not a spiritual person, then the question for you in regards to your speech are these. What do you want other people to get from you when you speak to them? Do you want them to get blessings, or do you want them to be wounded? What do you want to be, how do you want to be perceived by others, or what do you want them to take from your conversations when you are interacting with other people? What do you want them to get and walk away with? Do you want them to remember the wounds that you gave them? Do you want them to remember the coarse humor that you used, or do you want them to be influenced by your behavior and your language and your self-control? Now, if you are a spiritual person, how do you want to represent God in the world? And how do you want him to view your heart? Do you want to make people feel shame and contempt? Or do you want them to think that you're a person who's not in any way separated from the world? If you're a writer, how strong is your ability to communicate with words? And do you have to resort to those words that trigger basal ganglia type things? Or can you write in a way that makes people use their own frontal lobes to fill in the blanks of what you're saying and use their imaginations and be influenced and improved and bettered and strengthened by your words? Or just, are you going to just write the easy thing? If you're an influencer, what picture are you painting for your followers? If you're a business owner, what picture are you painting for your clients and customers about who you are in your social media posts when you choose to use foul language? What are you alienating a percentage of your potential clients and customers? Are you allowing the ones that resonate with that type of language to think that you're no different than they are? If you're a Christian, are you different than they are? Should you be different than they are? Does that matter? I'm not telling you, I'm just asking you. Let's talk about taking the Lord's name in vain for a second. One of the 10 Commandments, right? It means something bigger than just using his name when you say certain things. What it means to take the Lord's name is sort of like when you get married. Traditionally women take their husband's name. And so when Lisa married me, she took my last name and she's now Lisa Warren instead of Lisa McDonald. So she took my name. And so the implication is, when you accept Christ as your Savior, when you identify yourself to the world as a child of God's, you have taken his name. And if you go around and you live in such a way that dishonors his name, if you live in such a way that people don't see him in you or don't see him reflected well in you, that's taking his name in vain. You are using his name inappropriately, even if you don't speak words that use his name inappropriately. So this idea of how we live and how we choose to use our language and how we choose to let our frontal lobes either influence and calm down our basal ganglia or amplify it is in our control, and it reflects how much of God's influence we have in our life. I'm going to do a podcast sometime that's going to be about the difference between Savior and Lord. John Bevere wrote about this. All of us who are Christians want Jesus to save us. We recognize at some point that we have sin, that we need cleansing, that we need salvation, and we want him to save us. And we understand that he died on the cross to do that for us. So we're happy with the idea of having a Savior. But not many of us are comfortable. My phone just dinged. Not many of us are comfortable with the idea of having a Lord. And what does that mean? When you have a Lord, you let somebody else influence and control your decision making. You defer to their direction. You defer to his guidance and leadership, and you let that lordship influence the way that you think and speak and step and behave in the world. Because he didn't just save you and wipe the slate clean so you could keep living like you were living. He saved you so that you could be free and live in a bigger, more expanded state of who you're designed to be. And that involves using your frontal lobes to reflect and carefully process those impulses that your deeper parts of your brain generate, so that you can navigate all of that stuff and come out changing your mind and thereby changing your life. I want to cultivate in my life, for example, in my operating room, I want to create a culture where people feel safe, where people feel comfortable, where I'm never going to verbally abuse them. I'm never going to use language in my room that might negatively impact somebody. I'm going to create a culture where people don't feel comfortable cussing in my room. Why? Not because I'm holier than thou, because I don't ever want my words to be the thing that keeps people from seeing who I really am or seeing who they could be. I don't want to ever create a space with my words that's harmful to somebody else or dangerous to somebody else. I don't ever want that. I want my language to be careful and controlled and thoughtful. I want to be willing and able to bridle my tongue so that I can show that I am wise. I'll leave you with Psalm 19. I think it's useful. Keep my heart from presumptuous sin, he says. Let's look at it starting in verse 12. How can I know all the sins lurking in my heart? Cleanse me from these hidden faults. Keep your servant from deliberate sins. Keep your servant from presumptuous sins. Don't let them control me. Then I will be free of guilt and innocent of great sin. May the words of my mouth and the meditation of my heart be pleasing to you, O Lord, my rock and my redeemer. Friend, before you speak, say that prayer. May the words of my mouth and the meditation of my heart be pleasing to you, O Lord, my rock. Friend, if you're a writer, before you write, say that prayer. May the words of my mouth and the meditation of my heart be pleasing to you, O Lord, my rock and my redeemer. Be under his lordship. If you're a social media influencer, If you're an artist, if you're a musician, if you're posting out there somewhere, think about what you're posting. If you're a Christian writer and you have an influence of thousands of people on Instagram or Twitter, say that before you write your post. May the words of my mouth and the meditation of my heart be pleasing to you, O Lord, my rock and my redeemer. Would that change the words that you choose to speak? Proverbs 15:15 says, for the despondent, every day brings trouble, but for the happy heart, life is a continual feast. Friend, you get to decide that. And from a spiritual and neuroscience perspective, your heart and your brain are happier when you filter your language, because you don't go through that emotional turmoil of wounding people with your words and knowing that you're doing it. You can filter out the hiss. You can filter out the hunched up back of the cat by using your frontal lobes to calm things down. Using the higher parts of your brain is good for you, and that's why God made you that way. And it's a choice that you get to make. You get to choose. Are you going to react and respond in your primitive brain, or are you going to react and respond in response to your frontal cortex that only us among all animals have that amazing ability to control how we respond to our thinking and to external stimuli? Do you see the choice? I pray that every word I speak in this life from this day forward, because I always haven't been, but I pray that every day from today forward, every word I speak in my life helps somebody else. And for me, I can't see how using profanity in any context, even when I'm mad, helps me achieve the goal of helping other people with my words. If we're supposed to be God reflectors in this life, then we have to mimic what he says and what he does. And he doesn't curse people. He doesn't damn people. He dies for them. He loves them. He rises to show them compassion, Isaiah says. He searches the ends of the earth to find people who need his help. He leaves everything. He leaves everything to go and find the one who's lost. He never, ever curses or damns people. They do it to themselves. He doesn't do it. So why would we do it? If we want our brains to become healthier, feel better, and be happier, my friend, we have to learn how to bridle our tongues. That is how we handle the hard parts of life. It's how we show ourselves that we're finally getting wise to the secrets of becoming infinitely happier. This is self-brain surgery. It's biblical, it's neuroscience, and it's good self-care. It will help you to learn how to bridle your tongue when your heart's under pressure. And it will help, but you have to start today. Hey, thanks for listening. The Dr. Lee Warren podcast is brought to you by I've Seen the End of You, a neurosurgeon's look at faith, doubt, and the things we think we know, available everywhere books are sold, from Waterbrook Penguin Random House. Hey, don't forget to support your local booksellers. Subscribe to the show so you never miss an episode. And check me out on social media. I'm at Dr. Lee Warren, and Lisa is at Lisa D. Warren on Instagram and Twitter. We love to connect with you. Go to the website, wleewarrenmd.com, for more information about this show, my newsletter, my books, and more. And the theme music for the show is Blue Highway by Poddington Bear via freemusicarchive.org. Hey, you can't change your life until you change your mind, and you have to start today. I'm Dr. Lee Warren. Hey, bridle your tongue. It'll make you happier, I promise. It'll keep you cool, calm, and collected no matter what you're facing. I'm going to talk to you next time about something different, and I'm excited about that too. I will be with you soon. God bless you in the meantime, and have a great day.